Beneath the merciless New Mexico sun of 1881, María Walsh, a widowed Mexican-Irish woman, haunts a crumbling horse station, her heart buried with her husband and infant son. Grief has made her a ghost, until a child's faint cry pierces the desert silence, pulling her into a choice that could ignite a war or mend her soul. Will this act of compassion defy a ruthless killer and rewrite her fate? Subscribe now and share where you're listening from, Redstone's dusty trails or beyond. Stay tuned. Secrets, betrayal, and a single shot under moonlight await. Can a broken woman become the storm that changes everything? Don't miss the truth unveiled. The New Mexico desert of 1881 stretched like a graveyard of cracked earth, the sun a hammer pounding life into submission. Dust swirled in lazy spirals, carried by a wind that moaned like a mourner at a forgotten funeral. María Walsh, 34, half Mexican, half Irish, stood in the doorway of a rotting horse station, her shadow long and thin across the parched ground. 3 years ago, she'd buried her husband, Sean, ambushed by bandits, and their newborn, Tomas, taken by fever. The wooden cross out back marked their graves, but it was Maria's heart that lay 6 feet under, cold and still. She moved through her days like a specter, her calloused hands mending fences, feeding the last bony horses, her green eyes, once bright as sagebrush, dull as the ash in her hearth. The station, a sagging relic of adobe and splintered wood, stood alone on the Redstone Trail, a half-day's ride from town. Once a bustling stop for traders and drifters, it was now a husk, much like Maria herself. She wore a faded calico dress, its hem frayed from dragging through the dirt, and a leather belt heavy with a knife she hadn't used since Sean taught her to skin game. Her auburn hair, streaked with early gray, was tied back, loose strands whipping her sun-scorched face. Each morning, she hauled water from a dwindling well, her muscles screaming, her mind numb. The townsfolk called her the Widow of the Wind, a name whispered with pity and distance. Redstone's people didn't linger when they passed her station. They saw a woman broken, living only because death hadn't bothered to claim her. That afternoon, the sky turned bruise purple, clouds churning like a stampede. A thunderstorm roared in, lightning splitting the heavens, thunder shaking the earth like a warning from God. Maria scrambled to secure the station, slamming shutters against the gale, her boots slipping in the sudden mud. Rain lashed the desert, rare and violent, turning the ground to a slurry that sucked at her heels. The storm passed as quickly as it came, leaving the air thick with the scent of wet sage and ozone. Silence settled, heavy and unnatural, broken only by a sound so faint, Maria thought she'd imagined it. A low, keening moan, like a wounded animal, coming from the rocky outcrop 100 yards off. She froze, hand on the doorframe, heart kicking against her ribs. Bandits roamed these parts, and coyotes didn't cry like that. The moan came again, weaker, human. Maria grabbed her lantern, its flickering light cutting through the dusk, and stepped into the cooling desert. Her boots crunched on gravel as she followed the sound, her knife now in hand, its weight a small comfort. The crevice, a jagged scar in the earth, gaped before her. She raised the lantern, and there, sprawled among the stones, lay a girl, Apache, no older than 4. Her small body curled beside the bloated corpse of a horse, its hide pierced with bullet holes. Blood stained the sand, dark and sticky. Maria's breath caught. The girl's black hair was matted with dirt, her buckskin dress torn, one tiny wrist adorned with an eagle feather charm that gleamed in the lantern's glow. A mark of a warrior clan, one not to be trifled with. Her chest rose faintly, each breath a struggle. A gash on her leg oozed, the flesh swollen and hot. For a moment, Maria stood rooted, the desert's vastness pressing in. She saw Thomas in the girl's stillness, his tiny form gone cold in her arms years ago. The memory clawed at her, sharp as a blade. She knelt, the damp earth soaking her knees, and touched the girl's brow. Fever burned under her fingers. The Redstone folk would curse her for this. Apaches were the devil's own, they'd say, their raids leaving bodies and burned wagons in their wake. Helping one was to invite ruin, maybe death. Maria's hand trembled, hovering over the girl. She could walk away, let the desert decide the child's fate. No one would know. But the girl's shallow breaths, the fragile pulse under her skin, anchored Maria to the moment. Her grief, long a stone in her chest, cracked open. She sheathed the knife, slid her arms under the child, light as a bundle of sticks, and lifted her. The girl whimpered, head lolling against Maria's shoulder. Back at the station, Maria lay her on a cot by the hearth, the fire casting shadows that danced like ghosts. She fetched water, rags, and a jar of salve her mother had taught her to make from desert herbs. As she cleaned the wound, the girl stirred, her dark eyes fluttering open for a heartbeat, wild with fear, then closing again. Maria worked in silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the wind rattling the shutters. She didn't know the girl's name, didn't know if she'd live till dawn. For now, she called her Lark, after the birds that sang even in the harshest summers. The eagle feather charm glinted, a warning of trouble to come, a warrior's kin, lost in a land that hated her kind. Maria's hand steadied, her purpose clear. She'd fight for this child, though the cost might be everything. The eagle feather charm on the girl's wrist caught the firelight, a silent promise of trouble stalking the horizon. María Walsh, hand still damp from tending the child's wound, felt the weight of her choice settle like a stone in her gut. Outside, the New Mexico night hummed with unseen eyes, coyotes or worse, men who'd kill for less than a whisper of Apache blood. Morning broke over the Redstone Trail, the sun a bloodshot eye glaring through a haze of dust. Maria hadn't slept, her vigil split between the girl, Lark, she'd named her, and the creak of the station's walls, each sound a potential threat. The child's fever held, her breath shallow but steady, the gash on her leg cleaned but angry. Maria's own weariness clung like a damp cloth, but she shook it off, tying her auburn hair tight and slipping her knife into her belt. Lark needed medicine, real medicine, not just desert herbs. Redstone's doctor was her only shot, though the town's hate for Apaches burned hotter than the noon sun. She wrapped Lark in a gray blanket, hiding the girl's buckskin dress and that telltale charm. The child's weight was nothing, her small frame curled against Maria's chest as she saddled her mare, a lean roan named Cinder. The 5-mile ride to Redstone felt like crossing no man's land. Cinder's hooves kicked up red dust, the trail flanked by mesquite and jagged rocks that seemed to watch her pass. Maria's eyes scanned the ridges, half expecting Schilling's men, bandits in all but name, cloaked in the law's thin veneer. Elias Schillings, the bounty hunter who'd whispered his threat last night, was a vulture circling the weak, his wealth built on blood and stolen land. Redstone emerged from the haze, a cluster of adobe buildings and clappered shacks baking under the sky. The main street buzzed with Saturday trade, women bartering for flour, men spitting tobacco and swapping lies outside the saloon. Maria dismounted at the livery, tying Cinder and cradling Lark, whose fevered warmth seeped through the blanket. Eyes followed her, sharp as spurs. A butcher paused his cleaver, a woman clutched her basket tighter, and children stopped their game of stickball to stare. Whispers slithered through the crowd. Apache raids, dead settlers. The widow's gone mad. The doctor's office, a squat building with a crooked sign, smelled of carbolic and stale whiskey. Doc Harlan, a grizzled man with hands steadier than his morals, looked up from his desk. "Maria Walsh," he drawled, squinting at the bundle in her arms. "What's this foolishness?" She pulled back the blanket, revealing Lark's pale face and the swollen leg. "She's hurt. Needs tending." Harlan's eyes narrowed, catching the eagle feather charm. "Apache," he spat, like the word was poison. "You know what they did to the Carson wagon train? 10 dead, burned to cinders." "She's a child," Maria said, voice low but iron-hard. "Fix her," Harlan grunted, muttering about damn fool women. But he cleaned the wound, slathered it with ointment, and bound it with rough bandages. "She'll live if the infection doesn't spread," he said, pocketing her coins. "But you're asking for a noose, keeping her." Maria didn't answer, her focus on Lark's faint stir, a whimper escaping the girl's cracked lips. Outside, the street had grown quiet, the crowd parting like a wound. Elias Shillings leaned against a hitching post, his black duster flapping like raven wings, a colt gleaming at his hip. His face was all angles, eyes cold as a snake's, a scar curling his lip into a permanent sneer. Beside him stood 2 of his men, rifles loose but ready. "Mornin', widow," Shillings called, voice smooth as oiled leather. "That's a mighty curious burden you're carrying." Maria's grip on Lark tightened, her knife a reassuring weight. "She's mine to care for," she said, meeting his gaze. Shillings stepped closer, his boots crunching gravel, his men shadowing him. The crowd watched, hungry for a spectacle. "Careful now," he said, low enough for only her to hear. "That girl's kin to trouble, Blackwing's kind. You keep her, you're spittin' on Redstone's dead." His eyes flicked to the charm, and Maria saw it, a flicker of fear, quickly masked. He knew who Lark was, and it wasn't just Apache hate driving him. "By sundown tomorrow," he murmured, "you'll hand her over, or I'll take her. And you'll beg for the mercy I don't give." Maria's pulse hammered, but she held his stare, her voice steady. "Touch her, Shillings, and you'll find out what a widow's got left to lose." A murmur rippled through the crowd, shock, maybe respect. Shillings' smile didn't waver, but his scar twitched. He tipped his hat, mock polite, and turned away, his men trailing like wolves. Maria mounted Cinder. Lark clutched tight and rode out, the town's eyes burning her back. She didn't see the butcher slip away, heading for Shillings' camp, nor the glint of a spyglass on the ridge. Back at the station, Maria laid Lark on the cot, the girl's fever unbroken. As she boiled water for broth, her mind churned. Shillings' fear of the charm meant Lark was no ordinary child. She was Tà'cho Blackwing's daughter, the raven of Apache lore, a warrior whose name struck terror in men like Shillings. But why fear a girl? Maria's gaze fell on Lark's leg wound, the knife's clean edge. Not an Apache blade, too precise, like a hunter's skinning knife, like Shillings' men might carry. A cold truth took root. The Carson raid, blamed on Apaches, was a lie. Shillings had staged it, and Lark had seen it. She was a witness he needed silenced, just as Sean's death had silenced a man who'd questioned Shillings' land grabs. Maria's hands clenched, nails biting her palms. She'd saved a child, but she'd also unearthed a snake's nest, one that might swallow them both before the next dawn. The truth Maria Walsh had uncovered burned like a brand in her mind. Elias Shillings was no mere bounty hunter, but a butcher cloaked in lies. And Lark, the child she'd sworn to protect, was the key to his undoing. As she sat by the cot, the New Mexico night pressed against the station's walls, thick with the threat of a reckoning. Dusk bled into midnight, the desert sky a sprawl of stars sharp as broken glass. Maria's hands, still clenched from the ride back from Redstone, ached as she stirred a pot of thin broth over the hearth. Lark lay on the cot, her small chest rising and falling, the fever clinging like a stubborn shadow. The girl's leg wound, bound in fresh bandages, showed no new rot, but her eyes remained closed, her face taut with pain. Maria's own exhaustion gnawed at her bones, yet sleep was a stranger. Every creak of the station's timbers, every rustle beyond the shutters, snapped her gaze to the door. Schilling's threat, sundown tomorrow, hung like a noose, and the glint of that spyglass on the ridge haunted her. Someone was watching, waiting. She dipped a rag in cool water, pressing it to Lark's brow, and whispered, "Hold on, little one." The eagle feather charm on the girl's wrist gleamed, a tether to Tà'cho Blackwing, the Apache warrior whose name alone made men like Schilling's flinch. Maria's mind raced, piecing together the fragments. The Carson raid, staged to frame Apaches. Lark's knife wound, too clean for a skirmish. Sean's death, tied to Schilling's greed for land. Lark had seen something, enough to make her a threat to a man who'd kill to keep his empire of lies intact. Maria's fingers brushed the knife at her belt, Sean's lessons in wielding it a faint echo. She wasn't a fighter, but she'd be damned if she let Schillings touch this child. A soft scratch broke her thoughts. Lark stirred, her tiny hand twitching toward the hearth's ashes. Maria froze as the girl, eyes half open, dragged her fingers through the soot, tracing shapes on the floorboards. A figure with a winged tattoo, arms spread like a shield, standing before a smaller figure, a child. Flames curled around them, jagged lines of ash. Lark's lips moved, a faint murmur in Apache, too soft to parse. Maria's breath hitched. The drawing wasn't a dream, it was a memory. Lark had seen Blackwing fight, seen fire and death, seen Schilling's men. The truth clicked like a cocked hammer. The girl wasn't just Blackwing's daughter, she was a witness to a massacre, left to die in the desert to bury Schilling's sins. Maria knelt, her shadow merging with the ash. "You saw it, didn't you?" she whispered, though Lark's eyes fluttered shut again. The drawing confirmed what her gut had screamed. Schillings hadn't just staged the raid. He'd slaughtered his own kind to spark a war, to justify his land grabs and bounties. Sean's death 3 years back followed the same pattern, a bandit ambush on a man who dared question Schilling's claims. Maria's hands shook, rage and fear coiling tight. She'd saved Lark from death, but now they were both targets, trapped in a web spun by a man who'd burn the world to keep his secrets. A low creak from the porch snapped her head up. She grabbed the knife, heart pounding, and crept to the window. The desert was still, but a faint scrape, like a boot on sand, came from the dark. She eased the shutter open a crack, moonlight spilling across the yard. Nothing moved, yet the air felt alive, heavy with intent. Blackwing was out there. She was sure of it. A warrior like him wouldn't leave his daughter to chance. He'd tracked her this far. Blood, cloth, maybe the ash itself. Maria's pulse steadied. If he came, he'd bring salvation or chaos, and she wasn't sure which scared her more. She turned back to Lark, tucking the blanket tighter. "Your pa's coming, I reckon," she said, voice low. "And I'm betting he's meaner than Schilling's whole crew." A faint smile tugged at her lips, the first in days. "To you, out there listening to this tale unfold, I'm grateful you're here, riding this trail with me. If you're hooked on Maria's fight, hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're tuning in from. Maybe a dusty town like Redstone or somewhere far off. Your support keeps these stories alive, and trust me, the storm's just brewing." The night stretched on, each hour a taut wire. Maria cleaned her knife, its blade catching the firelight, and checked the station's weak points. Loose boards, a back door that wouldn't hold against a determined kick. She dragged a crate to block the entrance, her arms burning. Lark's ash drawing lay stark on the floor, a map of betrayal. Maria's thoughts turned to Blackwing. His legend painted him as a ghost, striking from shadows, but also a father, desperate and human. If he reached them before Shillings, they might live. If not, sundown would bring blood. A horse's snort cut the silence, sharp as a gunshot. Maria doused the fire, plunging the room into darkness, and gripped her knife. Footsteps, deliberate and heavy, circled the station. A voice, low, not Shillings, spoke in Apache, then Spanish, rough but clear. "Woman of the station, I seek my daughter." Maria's heart leapt. Blackwing. She unbarred the door, knife ready, and faced the night. A tall figure stood in the moonlight, hair long and black, eyes like flint. A winged tattoo faint on his arm. Behind him, the desert held its breath. And Maria knew. Salvation had come, but so had the edge of a war. Tà'cho Blackwing stood in the moonlight, his silhouette a blade carved from the New Mexico night, his eyes locking onto María Walsh with a father's desperation and a warrior's steel. Behind him, the desert held its secrets, but the faint clatter of hooves on distant stone warned that Elias Shilling's men were closing in, their hunger for blood as sharp as the coming storm. The air inside the horse station was thick, the doused fire leaving only the scent of charred wood and fear. Maria lowered her knife, her pulse a drumbeat, and gestured Blackwing inside. He crossed the threshold, his moccasins silent on the floorboards, his gaze falling on Lark's small form curled on the cot. The girl's fevered breaths rasped in the quiet, her ash drawing of fire and betrayal still stark beside her. Blackwing knelt, his calloused hand brushing her brow, his voice a low Apache murmur, like a prayer to Azure. K-Vault secreted prayer for the spirits. Maria watched, her throat tight, as the warrior's hard edges softened, if only for a moment. "She lives," he said in rough Spanish, turning to Maria. "Because of you." Maria nodded, her voice steady despite the weight of the night. "She's strong. But they're coming. Shillings and his dogs. They want her dead." Blackwing's eyes darkened, the winged tattoo on his arm catching the moonlight through a cracked shutter. "They will find only death," he said, his words a vow carved in stone. Maria's gut twisted. She knew Shillings's kind men who'd slaughter a child to bury their sins. Her husband Sean's face flashed in her mind, his blood staining the sand 3 years ago. Another of Shilling's lies. This time, she wouldn't stand idle. The distant hooves grew louder, a rumble like thunder rolling across the desert. Blackwing rose, drawing a bone-handled knife, his movements fluid, predatory. "How many?" he asked. Maria peered through the shutter, counting shadows against the silvered sand. 10, maybe 12. Rifles. Torches. Her fingers tightened around her knife. Sean's lessons in fighting stirring like embers. The station was a trap, flimsy walls, one door, no escape. Blackwing scanned the room, his jaw set. "We make our stand here. Protect her." Maria's eyes flicked to Lark, then to the ladder leading to the roof. Sean had taught her to shoot from up there, the Winchester still stashed in a crate. "I've got a better idea," she said, voice low. Blackwing followed her gaze, understanding dawning. "You shoot?" She nodded. "Well enough." He hesitated, then pressed a small pouch of bullets into her hand. "Then make them bleed." The hooves stopped, a chorus of snorts and creaking leather outside. Shilling's voice cut the night, smooth as venom. "Widow, Send out the girl, or we burn you down. Maria climbed the ladder, her boots scraping rungs, and reached the roof. The desert sprawling vast and merciless below. The Winchester was there, dust-coated but oiled, its weight familiar. She loaded it, the click of each bullet a promise. Below, Blackwing barred the door, his knife ready, a shadow among shadows. Schilling's men fanned out, torches casting jagged light, their rifles glinting. "Last chance, Maria," Schilling's called, stepping into view, his black duster flapping, his scar a pale slash in the moonlight. Maria's blood roared. This was the man who'd killed Sean, who'd massacred Blackwing's kin, who'd left Lark to die. Her hand steadied, the rifle's stock cold against her cheek. She aimed, her breath slow. Sean's voice in her ear. "Wait for the shot, you can't miss." A torch arced toward the station, shattering a window, flames licking the frame. Blackwing lunged, stomping the fire, but shots rang out, splintering wood. He dove for cover, returning a thrown knife that caught a man's arm, drawing a scream. Maria's heart pounded, but her hands were rock. Schillings laughed, striding closer, his Colt drawn. "You're alone, widow. No one's coming." He was wrong. She was no longer alone, not with Blackwing below, not with Lark's life at stake. Her finger found the trigger. Schilling's chest filled her sight, his smug grin a taunt. The desert held its breath, the stars unblinking. One shot cracked the night, sharp as lightning. Schilling staggered, his grin gone, blood blooming dark on his shirt. He fell, knees hitting sand, eyes wide with the shock of a man who'd never seen death coming. The torchlight flickered, his men frozen, then scattering like roaches, their shouts swallowed by the wind. Maria exhaled, the rifle hot in her hands. Below, Blackwing kicked the door open, his knife red, his eyes finding her on the roof. He nodded, a warrior's respect, as the last of Schilling's men vanished into the dark. The station smoldered, but stood. Lark stirred, a faint cry from the cot. Maria climbed down, legs shaking, and knelt beside her, Blackwing at her side. The desert was silent now, its judgment past. Schillings was dead, his lies broken, but Maria knew the cost of truth was never paid in full. The desert exhaled as Elias Schilling's blood soaked the sand, his empire of lies crumbling under the New Mexico stars. María Walsh, rifle still warm in her hands, stood beside Tà'cho Blackwing, their shadows merging over Lark's trembling form. The night was theirs, but the dawn would bring Redstone's judgment, and Maria knew truth came with a price heavier than a single bullet. Sunrise painted the desert in hues of rust and gold, the horse station a scarred sentinel against the endless horizon. Maria knelt by Lark's cot, the girl's fever finally breaking, her small hand clutching Maria's fingers. Blackwing stood at the door, his knife cleaned but his eyes restless, scanning the trail for signs of Schilling's men returning. The air smelled of smoke and sage, the station's charred window, a reminder of the night's violence. Maria's body ached, her hands bruised from the rifle's recoil, but her mind was clear. She'd killed a man, not just any man, but the snake who'd taken Sean, who'd nearly stolen Lark. Yet Redstone wouldn't see her as a savior. They'd see an Apache's ally, a traitor who'd gunned down their bounty hunter. Blackwing broke the silence, his Spanish halting but firm. "You fought like one of us." "Why?" Maria looked at Lark, then at the wooden cross out back where Sean and Tomas lay. "Because I've lost enough. She's worth more than their hate." Blackwing nodded, his winged tattoo stark in the morning light. "My daughter calls you Madrecita. She does not give her heart lightly." Maria's chest tightened, the word a balm and a wound. She brushed Lark's hair, the girl stirring with a faint smile, whispering, "Madrecita." in sleepy Spanish. The clatter of hooves shattered the moment. Maria tensed, but Blackwing raised a hand. Not enemies. Not yet. A lone rider approached, dust trailing like a ghost. It was Amos, the grizzled liveryman from Redstone, his face lined with worry. "Maria," he called, dismounting. "Town's in an uproar. Schilling's dead, and they're blaming you and the Apache. They're talking a posse. Tomorrow, maybe sooner." Maria's jaw set. "Let them come." Amos shook his head. "You don't get it. They want the girl. Say she's proof you're with Blackwing's raiders." Blackwing stepped forward, his presence a storm held in check. "They touch her, they die." Maria stood, her voice low. "No more blood, not today." "Amos, tell them Schillings was a liar. The Carson raid, he did it, not Apaches. Lark saw it." Amos scratched his beard, skeptical but listening. "That's a tall tale, Maria. Got proof?" She pointed to Lark's leg, the knife wound's clean edge. "That ain't Apache work, and his men ran when he fell. Cowards don't run from a clean fight." Amos nodded slowly, promising to carry her words. But his eyes said Redstone's hate ran deeper than reason. Blackwing prepared to leave, lifting Lark gently, her arms wrapping around his neck. "We go to my people," he said. "Safe for now." Maria's heart lurched. She'd fought for this child, killed for her, but letting go felt like losing Tomas again. Lark reached for her, small hands grasping. "Madrecita, come." Blackwing met Maria's gaze, his voice steady. "She needs you. Not always, but often. Come to our camp each full moon. Teach her your ways, as I teach her ours." Maria swallowed, the offer a lifeline across worlds. "I'll come," she said, the words a vow. Weeks later, Maria rode her mare, Cinder, across the desert. The full moon, a silver coin guiding her to Blackwing's camp. The trail wound through canyons, past saguaro standing like silent sentinels. Redstone's whispers followed her. Traitor, Apache lover. But they were just noise now. The camp emerged in a valley, a scatter of hide tents and low fires, Apache voices rising in soft song. Lark ran to her, laughing, her leg healed, the eagle feather charm glinting. "Madrecita!" she cried, hugging Maria's knees. Blackwing followed, his nod one of respect, not just gratitude. Maria stayed 3 days, teaching Lark Spanish words for stars and sage, learning Apache names for the winds. Blackwing shared stories of his lost wife, killed in Schilling's raid, his grief a mirror to Maria's own. They worked side by side, mending nets, sharpening tools, their silence a bond stronger than words. The camp wasn't paradise. Hunger lingered. Soldiers patrolled nearby. But it was alive, defiant. Maria felt it. A purpose, a place where her scars didn't define her. Back at the station, she found a small bundle on her porch. Lark's gift, a woven cord with a single eagle feather. Maria tied it to her wrist, a promise kept. Redstone's posse never came. Amos's words sowed enough doubt to stall their vengeance. The desert stretched before her, no longer a graveyard, but a land of stubborn life. Maria wasn't the widow of the wind anymore. She was Madrecita, a bridge between worlds, her heart tethered to a girl and a warrior who'd given her back what the sand had stolen. The desert's tale of Maria, Lark, and Blackwing fades into the New Mexico sunset, a story of grit, truth, and unlikely bonds. What did this journey stir in you? Did Maria's courage or Lark's resilience linger in your thoughts? Drop your reflections below. I'd love to hear where this story took you, whether Redstone's dusty trails or beyond. Grateful for you riding along. Your presence keeps these tales alive. Until the next horizon, when the wind carries another story, I'll be here, ready to share. Stay curious and see you under the next starry sky.